I am being watched. Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest, Season 3, Episode 7. It's called The Perfect Mark. So spoilers for the episode, as always. This is an interesting episode in that it's kind of a light-hearted, fun hijinks main plot, but there's some other bigger like HR stuff kind of moving in the background, which is making bigger plays. In fact, we kind of reached the end of the Lasky stuff, which is mostly good. I would say that it does feel a little bit rushed in the sense that I don't think I really truly cared about him by the time he dies at the end of this episode. And they did a couple of things to make you just try and care. Simple little things like he was starting to turn last episode and realize what HR really was. This episode, he makes a speech about how he thought HR was all about loyalty, but they're actually hurting people and they're going to kill this innocent woman. Well, she's not actually that innocent, but they think she's innocent. And he's clearly conflicted about this, and he's kind of like making this sort of little sob speech to Carter right before the scene where he dies towards the end of the episode. And it's all fine. I see what they're trying to do with that. I think the one thing that's missing for me to truly have like cared about his death by the end is that I think all the little nudges they were doing were perfectly fine, but I think it needed one more bigger thing, one more thing where he made a choice on his own with his own agency to not kill someone, right? Obviously, yeah, he lets Carter and whatever do what they want when they show up during the episode, and he doesn't want to kill the guy, but I think putting him in a situation where he has to risk his own like secrets or identity or life to save someone who they've asked him to kill or something like that. So, something where he makes a big definitive choice to not do the bad thing, even without Carter being there, sort of poking him in the right direction, I think would have went a long way to like be like, okay, he's actually redeeming himself. He's actually on this path to being a better person. Obviously, he was starting to be on that path anyway, but I think that big solo decision could have made a big difference in how much I cared by the time he was gone. As it is, like it worked relatively well for what it was. I think the best part of his plot was the sort of the big turnaround where Carter already knew he was a bad guy and kind of flipped the tables on him. That was by far the best part of his entire existence on this show so far. I will say I'm a little surprised he died this quickly. I kind of expected that it was going to be a goner sometime in the season. I didn't necessarily think that it was going to be this quick. It felt like having someone working and like spying on HR for the Team Machine, especially since more and more of these plots between Team Machine and the HR stuff that Carter's doing have been intermingling a lot. In fact, they kind of do in this episode. Which is funny because I talked about how I really liked how the plots came together in the past two episodes, and one of the things I said was that last episode it did it in a very different way to the prior episode, and that meant that it didn't feel like it was doing the same thing again. I actually think they've done it again. They've pulled it off where for the third episode in a row, the A plot and the B plot are intermingled, but the way they sort of like come together doesn't feel like they're just rehashing the same kind of moment from either of the last two episodes. The last episode was a big dramatic moment with with the root in the cage with the guy. Before that, it was this kind of like Carter and Reese stumbling into the fact that again it's a high octane kind of moment because they're trying to save this kidnapped girl. Here it's a lot more low key. Here it doesn't play it as a big dramatic moment. Here it genuinely plays it as of course these are connected again. Like, Carter almost rolls her eyes when she sees Reese and Shaw coming down the street, and she's sitting in the car, she's listening to, surveillance, and Reese just gets in the car and they're just kind of like, all right, what are you here for? What are you here for? Which honestly led to a delightful little fist bump at the end. Like they're so in unison now at this point. It's just wonderful to watch. So yeah, really enjoyed that moment, and I think the way it intermingled with the main plot was quite well done, because HR's involved in what Team Machine are doing, and they are the sort of the threat, they're the culprits that might kill the suspect. The suspect being this therapist who's actually a con man, and I should say hypnotherapist, very different, but he's in danger because he's been stealing money from this Swedish guy who's a launderer for HR, and that's how they all get intertwined, and there's a whole like main plot with all that stuff. Some other stuff that I really liked in this episode. I thought there was a couple of really good moments with very dramatic lighting, which is not something that necessarily always sticks out on an episode of network TV. But the two moments in particular is one small moment where, what's his name, Quinn, is with Carter, right? And this is early in the episode, and he's at like a diner. He's bought her some coffee, and he's fishing for information. He's trying to find out if she's still exploring HR and trying to investigate Cal's murder and all that. And she kind of says, I think HR's involved, but she doesn't really go into it too much. She declines his help, but there's this moment when she walks away, and he gets a text from Simmons saying, is she going to be a problem? And the way he turns and looks over his shoulder, I thought the lighting in that moment was very, very good, because it did definitely kind of throw this light onto him that suggested that he was considering something bad. He's like, the decision he's making right here, the thing he's considering right here is whether or not he has to kill her. And I thought the drama of the lighting really actually helped that sell that moment, as well as the performance, obviously. The other moment, and this is from a pair of bookend scenes with Root, who's still in the library cage the entire episode. But there's a scene at the start and there's a scene at the end with her. And the scene at the start, Finch comes in, gives her some breakfast or dinner, whatever it is. She obviously insinuates she's trapped in a cage, blah, blah, blah. And the conversation goes to this place where Root says, are you jealous? Is it because the machine talks to me in a way that she won't talk to you? And the moment she says that, I mean, he's kind of got this lighting on his face already, but the particular shot right after she says that accusation, the dramatic lighting on his face is like heavily shadowed with like one beam of light going diagonally across his face. And the way he looks off to the side at her is a very, very cinematic and, dare I say, kind of creepy moment. And I don't think it's trying to like make Finch look creepy. I don't think it's suggesting that he is a villain per se, but maybe in this decision to keep her in here, regardless of how he's justifying it, maybe he kind of is doing a villainous thing by keeping her here. And it was something that really started making me think when we got to the later scene, when he comes back and he brings us some books, and they start talking about the machine again, and she says, oh, you started something, and I'm going to finish it. And you're worried about me, Harold, but I'm worried about you. I'm worried that you're not ready for this. And there's a couple of really nice moments in here. There's one particularly intriguing moment for me where Finch doesn't finish a sentence. He says, this asynchronous relationship you have with the machine, it can't be, and then he just kind of catches himself and doesn't say it. And then the reaction on Root's face, Amy Acker, sort of looks at him like, what were you about to say? And I genuinely don't know. Like, was he going to say that this relationship isn't healthy? That would make sense in context. Was he going to say this relationship just can't be, as in can't be a thing? Like, it's like I'm forbidding it. And what this got me thinking about was how he's kind of treating Root. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a lot more complex because Root's got this history and she's done a lot of things. It's not like night and day by any means. But it made me feel like he's treating Root like he treated the machine. And that he's keeping her trapped in a confined cage and not letting this relationship grow and evolve in the same way that he wouldn't let the machine grow and evolve and gain more humanity back in the early days of building it. And obviously it's kind of achieved that anyway, and that was a big part of the plot last season, is that the machine went through a lot of efforts to make sure it could keep its memories and all the rest of it. This is a fascinating little conversation that had a lot of weight to it, which is not really a part of the main plot all that much. I mean, maybe you could relate some things, because we're dealing with a con man and sort of siphoning off someone else or something. Maybe you could try and relate some things in here. But even just on its own, I felt like this was doing a whole lot to this really complex relationship that Harold has with the machine, that Root has with the machine, and how they are now kind of sparring over it, and how Finch is treating her and trying to just keep her confined in the same way that he did the machine. I think that's fascinating. And the idea that she's very confident that the machine's going to do what it's doing, and I don't think you're prepared for it, is interesting from the perspective of, okay, what's the machine doing? That's a question we've got as the audience, and like Root seems to have some, at least ideas as to what it is, if not knows some of it. But Finch, I do think, is underprepared for whatever that is, and he's not necessarily ready to accept a couple of things. And maybe the hard truth that the machine is willing to talk to Root because of how Finch was with the machine back in the day. Maybe the machine understands to some extent why Finch was the way he was, but it's why the machine doesn't talk to him the way she does to Root. And that's, I felt a lot of weight to almost every single word spoken between these two in both of these scenes. It felt like everything was kind of it'd be very, very easy for a TV show to have a couple of scenes where a main character goes and visits someone they've got imprisoned, and for it to just feel like we're doing a rehash of a Hannibal Lecter scene or something like that, or it's just a by the numbers, like, oh, it's tense because they may get out at some point. And I don't think either of these scenes ever even was trying to toy with let's play some tension because she might break out at any point. It never felt like that. It felt like, no, they're having a far more intricate conversation about stuff that relates directly to the themes of the show. It's more about Root challenging Harold's beliefs here and why he's doing what he's doing, and she might have a point, which means it carries weight with it. And then Harold's uncomfortableness, and that's why he's coated in those shadows when she's asking some of these questions, is that, yeah, he is in the dark. And he isn't really willing to come out into the light in some of these things. All of that was wonderful. I really like those scenes. Unsurprisingly, because typically good stuff comes with Root, especially. But I mean, I feel like Root's got a really high batting average, but I think it's only because she's been used so sparingly over the course of the last season and a half. Whereas Finch, we have every episode, so we have to have a lot of lighter moments with Finch, which is fine. That has its own purpose. It sets up this camaraderie and sort of family that he's building with Reese and now Shaw and Carter and everyone else. So, and Bear. Let's not forget Bear. Bear's important. So, really good stuff. Loved all that. As far as the main story goes, it's all right. It's even quite fun to a point. I think where it falls down a little bit for me is by the end of the episode, and it tries to sell this idea, this con man who is conning everyone around him. He's conning all of his patients. He's not really a licensed hypnotherapist. He's conning people for some sort of weird, like, exchange rate scheme where he has, like, a buddy come in and, like, they fake shoot each other. So the guy runs off without his money, and that's a whole thing that comes up. I did appreciate that Reese and Shaw just instantly knew there were blanks and didn't, intervene because they could just tell it was all a bunch of bullshit. Like, all of that was amusing. I think once it got to this back half of the episode where this character is trying to convince them, and I say convince them, like, I think he is actually in love with this woman that he's fallen for, and he genuinely wants to, like, leave and, like, give up this life and go and be with her. I thought every time he started talking about that, it felt just a little bit, I don't know, forced, maybe not forced, but just a little bit like, okay, this is serving its purpose. It's working for what it is. Some of the way that the others are judging him for what he does, Shaw says she wants to shoot him at one point. That's amusing. Then you add on the twist, which is that the girlfriend character is also a con man, and she's been conning him so she can take, either all of his money or at least something. It ends up being this baseball that a lot of the plot ends up revolving around of. But that stuff, her turning out to be like a maniacal villain and being like, you were my whale and you were a chump and you fell for all this. I was like, yeah, okay, that works. I don't feel much for it. They never really got me to care about the character all that much, so I don't think any of this landed with any kind of, and as in the complete polar opposite to the scenes with Root and Finch, which admittedly it's a bit of an unfair comparison because everything in there is stuff that we've been building for 2.5 seasons at this point, but a complete polar opposite in the sense that this stuff is like, oh, this is fine, it's just working. It's working on the surface level, it's doing its thing. You've got people exploiting each other. If anything, the themes of the conman plot feels like it more mirrors what's going on with Lasky and being used by HR and that kind of stuff. And there's some stuff in there. Obviously, some of the other big things to mention is Tierney's now dead as well. Him and Lasky both die at the end of the episode when he confronts him, catching him with Carter. And Carter begs with Tierney to be a cop in his final minute and point in the photographs to who the leader of HR is. And he does. So Carter, the big cliffhanger is that Carter now knows Quinn is in charge. So we'll see how that is. Also, Carter goes to see Elias for some help to find out what's going on with this laundering scheme and why everyone's interested in this Swedish antiques dealer or whatever he is. Which I have to actually give this credit here. So something that is done very well in this episode is how it tells its story with all of these moving parts without it ever being confusing or without it ever feeling messy. And one of the big elements of that I really noticed is that when she goes to Elias and says, hey, Elias, can you fill in some of these? Like, why would they be using this guy? What are they doing? And he basically just explains that HR don't want dirty money, so they put it to this antiques dealer, and then he goes to an auction and he bids on an item that is, there for one of the HR people. Someone representing HR is selling it so that the money goes back into the HR pool, but it's clean now. That's all fine and well, right? It explains that. And as he's explaining that, we see this example play out where we see him at the auction, we see him bidding on this baseball with all these autographs from the Yankees from like the 1920s and all the rest of it. And we see him go back to his shop, and he puts the ball in a pile with all the other junk that he's bought. See, the thing is that all these items that he's bidding on aren't real. They're not actually worth anything, except for this ball, because it turns out the con man has changed one of his emails, so he bids on the wrong item, and this ball is actually worth $4.4 million, which is what the rest of the plot ends up revolving around, because HR need to find this ball so they can recoup the money that was supposed to be coming to them. Some kid buys the ball from the antiques guy, and then later on the con man goes and gets it from this kid that he's paid to go get the ball. Right? So all this is playing out. What I really want to compliment, though, is that it just feels like as Elias is explaining this, and we're seeing this example play out of like HR giving him some money, him going to bid on stuff and getting the ball, and this kid buying the ball. It all plays out in this quick montage as Elias is explaining the sort of the system to Carter. I think in that moment, in that sequence, you don't actually know at that point that this baseball that we're seeing in this montage is then going to be a pivotal plot point. And it feels very, very natural when it shifts to becoming one, because then it ends up going to Finch, and he's like, hey, the con man did something funny with his emails, and he changed the number of the item he was meant to bid on. He was meant to bid on lot 402, but instead he bid on 406. Oh no. And that's kind of like, what the con man's game was, is to get this valuable item, and then he can, make a fortune off of that somewhere else with his girlfriend, and that was his whole plan. I think the way it tells all this is extremely well crafted, right? It takes real skill and real know-how to get across this obscene amount of information and make it all work and flow in a way that doesn't feel forced or convoluted or like you're hearing too much too quick. It all plays out flawlessly, and you never skip a beat, you never are confused, you never, everything just follows on. And if anything, you feel it's almost like a little twist when you realize, oh, that ball was important. It's now a pivotal plot point. Some real credit has to go out here for how they construct some of these episodes, because some of them, even the ones that maybe the main plot's not the most impressive from like an emotional or hard-hitting point of view, because this one certainly isn't. There's some hard-hitting stuff elsewhere in the episode. The main plot's just kind of fun and hijinksy. But even this is so well crafted in how it tells its story to get all of its information across. They've only got 42 minutes to tell their full episode. They've got a subplot to do. They've got all these characters to service. And that's something we've seen them kind of struggle with to an extent. I mean, Fusco shows up in this episode to help Carter, and also Reese at one point. And he's barely been in the last couple of episodes, which isn't a complaint so much, just to say that, hey, we've got so many characters now, we've got so much to do per episode, that some of them sometimes just have to take a back seat. I do know, one of the few things I know about the show, like past this point, is that eventually Carter's going to be gone just because the actress had to, if I remember correctly, they weren't sure if it was going to be renewed, so she ended up going to a different show, probably Empire, given that's what Henson ended up being more known for. But so that's the one thing I know. So we're going to ease up a little bit, I think, next season, where there'll be one less character. Not that I'm happy that we're losing Carter by any means. like I say, I can't emphasize enough just how well crafted all of this is in getting the information across cleanly. And it's not the first time the show's impressed me with that. The show often has a lot of details it has to get across with multiple parties involved. Just a couple of episodes with the girl, and you had the Russians, the head HR, you had Carter's investigation, you had all the stuff with Reese separate from all the stuff with Shaw and the kid, and all of it came together very well. Once in a while, a couple of scenes might feel a little bit rushed and have less impact as a result, but it's shockingly few and far between. It really is quite impressive just how well it's done. So the fact that the main character, the con man of the main case in this episode, the fact that his sort of turns and twists weren't wowing me, and that the twist that his girlfriend's actually a bigger con man than he is, like, it was fine and it worked to, give me a little chuckle, but it definitely wasn't where I was getting most of the enjoyment out of this episode, and it definitely didn't stick with me too much. We should also mention that Carter and Fusco fake the death of the Swedish antique stealer, because HR want him dead. They've told Lasky to do it, so they take this photo after they've put fake blood all over his head to Lasky, so Lasky can prove that he's killed him, but they actually tell him to skip town. So that's all fine and well. I just wanted to point this out because at one point Fusco calls him Dragon Tattoo, which gave me a chuckle because, like it fits timeline wise. Girl with a dragon tattoo. The original movie came out in 2009, then the Fincher remake I think was 2012. So regardless of which one he's referencing, because even the remake was still set in Sweden if I remember correctly. But I got a chuckle out of that little reference. So yeah, I mean, I think that was most of the stuff that I wanted to bring up for this episode. There's a lot to talk about with the switching of the baseball. It turns out the baseball he had was fake, even though he thought it was real. The girl had sort of paid off the kid to give her the real ball instead, and that's pretty much it. Maybe the one argument for that stuff not being great is that we spend maybe a bit too much screen time on, like, him making her promises and caring about her, which I understand why it's there and what they're trying to do with it, but because it doesn't work ultimately, you almost look back in hindsight and go, oh, could we have spent that time doing a bit more stuff with any of the other characters, basically. But hey, minor quibbles, it's still a very good episode. It's not quite as spectacular as the last two episodes, but it's a very solid episode, and some of those side plot nuggets, particularly rooting Finch, were excellent. So that is my thoughts on this person of interest. I'll see you next week for the next one. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, which is what helps me do this as much as I can, both here on MailFuzz TV and over on MailFuzz Movies. If you've not tried that channel, we do movie podcasts over there, horror movie podcast, sci-fi movie podcast, and a sort of general sort of franchisey, well, it's not just franchises, but Collector's Cut is the other one. Anyway, so go check out all the stuff, like, subscribe, all the usual YouTube bollocks. Thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?